You know Trevor, you know Ignazio, you know Sandra already. We have a new person on the podium, and that's Felicitas Schneider. And I'm very happy to introduce her because she was one of the pioneering people in Austria for food donation. And she currently manages the global platform for FLW. Food loss and waste experts, and has been very active in the field. So I want to start off with you, and I'll kick off the questions, and as I said, please jump in as soon as you feel ready to jump in. As you did start to work with food loss and donations in the 90s, or more early, can you explain us how it started off and also how you see the development and where the food banks got within the last 20, 30 years from your perspective in Austria?
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. It's very nice to be here in my hometown again, because I'm currently working in Germany, but I'm originally from Vienna, from Austria. So I started in 2001 with my first research project on food donation, because I had some experience during a student job in the retail. And I thought, okay, we have a lot of surplus food and we should somehow donate it. And in those days, only the Wiener Tafel existed since 2 years. And in parallel, we had in Austria, in Upper Austria, in Linz, the Sozialmarkt, the SOMA. So we had these two different organizations. It was a different model. The Sozialmarkt worked like a retailer with surplus food, and people could choose what they want to take. And it was very interesting to step in and to, as a researcher, and ask about the models and the impact. And yeah, it was very, very interesting. And also to convince governments to provide grants for research on the topic, because in the very beginning everybody said food waste, no, this is not an issue, and there was nothing available in research in Europe. There were some things about energy content of food in biogas facilities, but this was all, so prevention was not the topic. So it was very interesting to have the cooperation with you and your before all with Martin, yes, and all the others, and also to provide or to involve the governments and to try to support, to also bring together more stakeholders, and also to highlight or to identify and to highlight the responsibility of municipalities, also to support the implementation of food banks and other organizations redistributing surplus food. So yes, this was in the very beginning, and I think in the past 2.5 decades, there was a very interesting development. So we have a lot of different models at the moment, and I think also other activities were established in the meanwhile. When I think about 20 years ago, we had this sometimes also this problem or this discussion on the dumpster divers. And now, at least in Germany, the dumpster divers turned into an official organization. So food sharing activities are very prominent in Germany at the moment. And in the headquarters of my office, so in Braunschweig, there is a very big and strong food sharing community, and they have a very good cooperation with the Tafel, because if the Tafel is not able to take the surplus food, the food savers from the food sharing organization will step in. And I also funded Food Council in Braunschweig, and so we have also a cooperation with the Tafel and with the food sharing community, and so it's very interesting to see those cooperations and the development. And I think in the very beginning it was, this is my area, and this is yours, and don't step into my area, don't come too close. And now it's more joining forces and changing together the whole system. I think this is necessary. And of course we could speed up a little bit, or we should speed up. But it's, this is my motivation.
Thank you very much. I think it's a good, it's also a good picture that, again, we need to bring all the people on the table that work around the same problem and provide solutions. Maybe we can look at the role of food banks in that multi-stakeholder dialogue, I think, a bit in Europe. How do you see the role and also the perception of the work of food banks all over Europe? Are there differences? Are there similarities?
Well, that's a very interesting point. I think I can give a perception also from the other side of the table. Like when I was, because for 10 years I was a lawmaker, so I was receiving inputs instead of giving it. And what I think is that food banks have an amazing mission, a great work that is done on the territory, like everywhere in Europe, but also globally, but still are not known, or they don't have the visibility that they should. Like what I can say, especially from a Brussels perspective, so from a European Union perspective, is that other organizations that are more based on, let's say, talking, gatherings, and proposing broader solutions, but they don't operate on the field, have probably more visibility than food banks, who are those who practically get, the food, safe food from the waste, from landfills, and bring it to the people in need. So I think there is room for improvement, for increase the presence and the visibility in all the platforms and all the sectors. For example, there are areas where we should operate more. For example, on the climate side, we've been present on the social and environmental side. We should get also on the climate, because the things are connected, and by that, increase the relation also with other stakeholders on civil society and the parties. But of course, like a lot has been done. But I think like the final end of all NGOs or all civil society organization is the end of them. Because that means that the problem doesn't exist anymore. So now, being realistic, this is not going to happen anytime soon. So we need to work a lot, at least, to reduce it. So that means reduce the quantity of food that is wasted in Europe, in our case. And on the other side, work to reduce the number of people who are in need, so on the social side. And that requires a lot of work on different fields. Mm-hmm.
Trevor, you work a lot with food banks when it comes to recommendations for policies. How do you see the role of food banks internationally to advise policies, or how do you use them to advise policies in the end?
Yeah, I think what I've seen most outside of the United States is that a lot of food banks do have very strong relationships with their legislators. I think a lot of them have shown that they're doing very important work, and that in many cases they're doing very important work with very few resources, and helping people understand just how much, looking at the social return on investment, how much, a dollar invested with the food bank, how much that actually does for society, both in terms of reducing hunger, but also increasing connections and making sure, people are, somebody either visits their home or they're getting out of their home to have these connections. And I think people do see value in that. Legislators see value in that. I think it's difficult to make the case to invest more funding in that, but I think I've seen food banks that have very strong relationships, and I think the next step is taking those relationships and getting more people to see the benefit of those and working. I think this is where there's an opportunity to work with like the climate folks or others that are interested in poverty reduction to get everybody moving towards the same page. But I think for many legislators, their local food bank is a very easy entryway to increase advocacy on a lot of other fronts through the lens of food banking.
Sandra, you and die Tafel Österreich has a very broad view on the whole issue of food waste and also on food poverty. What would be, and I think you have also, you mentioned it, you have multiple solutions on hand that are not really used as they could be used by the whole society. What would be most helpful for you as an Austrian food bank to really get the problem solved that you see? Big question. If you could wish from Christmas.
Yeah, I think what is important. What is important is really to get the stakeholders on the table, and we also saw it yesterday. We talked to one ministry, then we go to the next, and we go to the next, and so we spend a lot of time. And I think you have done it in the past when you published the first legal guide for Austria in 2011, I think. Yeah. So it
hasn't been revised since, so.
It's also used in German. And you were also explaining before, you were going from ministry to ministry, back and forth. And I think we really need a holistic view on the topic. We need so many different ministries, but otherwise we lose a lot of time just going to one ministry, going back and forth. And in a way, also, for instance, with liability, who is responsible? Do we need to involve even the Ministry of Justice? So it goes on, and we have the feeling we lose some time here. And it would be much more efficient to have really one dedicated group that really drives our topic forward, knowing that is a very interrelated topic between the different disciplines, and of course much has to do with sustainable nutrition, for instance. So this is it starts with giving good food to people, and it ends then with the food waste theme. So the more we interconnect, the better on the legislative side, but also on the operative side. And I also agree also with food sharing. That was also in Austria when we were always approached, can you take the catering stuff at the buffet at the end of a meeting? And that was also a reason why we said, we need other solutions. And it was almost 15 years ago that we then co-founded with Valentin Thurn and the Lebensministerium food sharing. And I think it was a great initiative to start, so always to find solutions, and maybe we are not the ones that then deliver the solution. I mean, we have the picture how the solution looks like, and then we enable others to do the job for us. So that's the same with the virtual food banking model, which is very a very smart idea to connect the donor with the recipient and to see how they can interact and to enable them, as well as we see how we can enable our charities to take up more food, to know how to deal with food, also to improve the client's knowledge on how to deal with food and how to cook it, etc. So there's lots of, we see us as an enabler in many respects. We do not have to be the ones that pick it up directly in every case, but to do it smart for the environment, but also for the people in need. I think there is lots of room for improvement here. There's lots of surplus food and lots of people in need. And I think here, we need support from all sides. And I think this is the best auditorium because so many disciplines here in the room, and each and every person is so important for us to get more food to people in need.
So if we join forces to provide solutions, what, from the research you have done, Trevor, where did you see the most impact of policies on the problem solving? Is there some specific areas where you say that's something we should look at because the impact is higher than in other areas?
Yeah, I think that maybe the two biggest areas are strategies to coordinate, which has clearly come up, getting the different ministries either through legislation or if they're able to do it on their own, forcing them to get together in the same room to talk about these topics. It's very easy. And before I joined this job, I used to work for the Department of Agriculture, and so it's very easy when people come in and say, I'd like you to do this, and it's, you look at what Congress, in our case it's Congress or Parliament or the legislature told you have the authority to do, and it's easy to say, well, I don't have the authority to do that, go talk to these people. It's not particularly satisfying, which is why I don't work for the government anymore, but it's very easy to do that. And so I think if that's happening, which it clearly is, going to the legislature, the parliament, Congress, whoever it may be, and saying, these people are not talking together. We have these very solvable problems. We have the solution. We know it needs to happen. We just need them to get together and talk about it so that we can do the good work that we're already doing on a much larger scale. And so I think interagency coordination is one, and then I think date labels is another one, especially since we know most food waste occurs at the household level. Getting people to understand, this may not be as applicable in Europe, so I apologize if that's the case, but in many countries, even where there is a coherent date labeling law, consumers don't understand what it means, and they'll see a date on a package and assume because that date has already passed, even if it's just a quality-based date, that it's no longer safe to eat. And in many cases, talking to food manufacturers, that date they don't want to put it too far out there because they think that when consumers see a date, if it's 5 years out from when I bought it, they're going to assume there's a lot of preservatives or something in this food, even though maybe it's a canned food, and canning is a preservation process that you can eat something many, many years after it's been canned and it still is totally safe to eat. But because of consumer perceptions, they're only going to put a date on there that's only 2 years out. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities, especially with the goal of reducing household level food waste by 30%. And maybe that's a government campaign. Maybe it's if there's retailers in the room, maybe there's things that you can do in the store to help consumers understand that these foods are good beyond this date. And if you don't want to eat it, it's still safe to donate beyond that date. That's totally fine as well. But I think in terms of biggest impact, date labels is probably one that would do a lot to reduce household level waste, and we know that's where, in many countries, the most waste is actually happening.
Maybe you mentioned before the Good Samaritan law of Italy. Can you expand a little bit of the impacts that came from that law? And we have Italians in the room, so they might be.
I think that would be more correct to end the microphone to our Italian representative, Marco or Greta, maybe. Because it's quite a unique case.
And I think you have data on how you...
The Good Samaritan law was first adopted in 2003, and it comes from actually an American experience that was adopted before. But I would ask our Italian colleague to take the floor.
Are you ready? Yeah, it's coming. Because that's, I think, an example where a policy change really had a great impact on the actual situation.
Yes, I can confirm that thanks to this law, we overcome from some critical points on the liability of the donors and the organization that recover the surplus food. But we can say that this law was overpassed with the law of 2016. So of course was really valuable, but can generate a misunderstanding in relation to the fact that we are considered as a food business operator. And so we have the same responsibility of the other business operator. While the Good Samaritan law forecasted that the organization that recovers surplus food are equalized to the final consumer. But the things are not in this way, and it is also related to the EU framework. In particular, the regulation 852 of 2004 related to the general food legislation that talk about the food business operator. So we are a food business operator. Of course, there are important the principle of flexibility in our case. So taking into consideration the nature of our action. So of course it was an important step, but we go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah.
No. Because of course, like the Italian case is the only one that is being regulated by law. First, as Greta was explained, 2003 and then 2016. But around the European Union, there were other cases of exemption that were foreseen by guidance connected with the idea of the Good Samaritan law that doesn't apply only for food, but it's just the idea that if you're helping someone in need, you need somehow to be exempted by liability. Of course, it's difficult to draw the exact line or where you should apply or not. But other EU countries have guidance on the application and of the exemption of liability on also on food donation, like France, and I think in Austria also there were guidance, right?
I think what Trevor found out is that there's quite some insecurity about this liability topic, and that it could be much more clarified when, how liability kicks in, and maybe even to look at also if countries have this Good Samaritan law, like in the US, it does not say that in terms of gross negligence or how is it called? Misconduct, you are of course liable, and but it's about the slight negligence topic, and here I think it would be possible on a European member state level to work on specifications and to see what can be done without, of course, adding any risk on the consumer side. I think, of course, that balance is important. We need to have food safety in place. But I think this is a topic, as mentioned, particularly in the hospitality sector, where we nowadays do not get much food, or we already take now up the liability, which is also happening already. So, I think here work would be appreciated. And maybe just one more comment also to Italy. I think what we always like is that there was one, correct me if I'm wrong, but Maria Gadda is working in the parliament, and she really was dedicated to the topic. She arranged that all stakeholders sit down, and she pushed forward in several directions. And I think here many good things came out of this initiative, and they looked at it holistically, I have the feeling, and this is not often so much done in other European countries. So we feel here really a lot of good results came out, like maybe also tax incentives on a municipality level, or raising awareness with the consumers, having funds also for the food bank. So really lots of different angles that I think come up to a good result. As we know that the food amounts have been increasing, but also correct me if I'm wrong, but due to the Gadda law, I think the numbers were increasing in Italy.
I can confirm that, especially for the distribution sectors, from which we can see an incredible increase in from 2016 after the issuing of the Gadda.
Yes.
I can add also that another important element for us was our manual for good and hygiene practices of 2015 that encompasses all that I mentioned before and make the right link with the European framework, and in which basically we declare the type of the activity that we are carrying out. And I think that is a strong means for all the stakeholders that are involved on our activity.
As you see, this is a very good example on how advocacy and the work of a food bank can influence lawmakers and legislation. So it's a very successful example.
Maybe one or two last questions from my side, and then please jump in. We don't have your recommendations yet, and we are waiting for them. But from what you see now, and I ask maybe Felicitas and Sandra, what do you think would be the most promising political measures that you have seen from other countries where you would say this would be helpful for Austria or Germany, maybe? What would you look at primarily, without knowing what Trevor will say in the end?
This is now the exam for us.
No, it's an open question.
So I'm working in a very international framework, and what I learned in the last 8 years in my current position, that you always have to look at the overall framework condition in a specific region. But I think key to a successful implementation of a strategy or of the overall idea to reduce food loss and waste throughout the food supply chain and to motivate the stakeholders is that you have more or less, you cannot plan it, you have to have the right people now at the right time in the right place. We heard this example, there was a person very engaged in the parliament, and in addition very active food banks, and so a lot of different positions came together, and then there was this joining forces and be able to push the topic forward. Unfortunately, this is not the case in a lot of countries, not in Germany, for sure. But there's a similar situation, for example, in Japan. There is also a league of parliament members, and they push the topic of food waste prevention a lot. And I think it's just important to get the stakeholders on the table. It sounds very simple, but it is the key, because as we heard, if the one ministry has a good idea but is not able to implement a strategy because another ministry has the responsibility for a specific issue, then it's not possible to implement something. And in the last 8 years, I experienced a lot of barriers, especially because the stakeholders do not cooperate. Or it's also a topic of different parties, different political parties in different ministries, and the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture, and they do not speak to each other. And you want to implement this? No, not with me. So this is not not supportive.
But on the other side, I mean, that's the political side. On the other side, there could be, or there are probably synergies between other stakeholders. I'm talking about companies. I'm talking about people who are fighting for climate questions. Like on the problem side, there's many people who have the same goal, is to stop food waste and also to stop poverty. So maybe if those actors join forces, they have more impact on the political side?
Definitely, yes, definitely. But so we experienced with Fridays for Futures, for example, they pushed again this food sharing sector and also this a little bit of change in the social norms and social perception that everybody can contribute to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. But after the pandemic, we thought, okay, this is a new drive, but I think this drive is already decreasing again, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay.
So not very promising.
So what's the promising side of the picture? I'm going to ask also the room.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think really the good side is that we have excellent partners also doing really the operative work with us, many of you sitting in the room, many consulting us, many helping us also with money donations, with time donations. So it's really a huge effort, and here we see that the movement is big and we have so many supporters from so different angles that I think we are very grateful. Yeah, and I think we have a big scaling opportunity still ahead. Let's see, there's a chance, and I think we have a very, very, very good fundament, and that is solid, and so we can also take things forward and try out things. We are going into new areas of food donation. So I think there's a lot going on, and many of you are involved in one or the other activity, and I think we will continue and try to make the movement still bigger and try to cooperate and see where we can go along with others, to join forces.
Just one other example I experienced a lot in the past 8 years. So to include also the agricultural sector, for example, it took us years and years to discuss this, that also cleaning activities are more and more possible and implemented. In some European countries, this is not a problem at all. Germany, Austria, Norway. So it's very difficult to implement such measures. And I think we just have to work on this further. So don't give up, but join forces and try again.
Thank you. As many stakeholders were mentioned, do you have questions or recommendations for us? We start at the back.
No recommendation, just a question for understanding. Trevor, you talked about the day labeling regulation. What does it mean? Can you explain it, please?
Mindesthaltbardatum?
Yeah.
I think there were some activities in Austria also, so maybe you start first and then Sandra can explain what has been done in Austria.
Yeah, so at the EU level, it's regulated and it's in alignment with Codex Alimentarius that if for quality-based dates you use certain language, so best if used by, and then for safety-based dates you use by. And that's, in many countries that's not the case, that there is that clear distinction, because countries in Europe do have that distinction. It makes it easier, but I'm not sure that consumers across the board know what the different date labels mean. And so I don't know if consumers understand that best if used by is a quality-based date, and that food, best if consumed by can be, food can be eaten well beyond that date and still be fine. And then used by is if you haven't eaten it by then or froze it by then, you might want to toss it. And so the consumer perception there, I think, is part of the reason food loss and waste at the household level is greater than it could be or should be. And you want to talk about,
Yes, Trevor was mentioning there is a legislative framework at the European Union level, but still, I mean, can we say that there is clarity for consumers? No, not at all. And in every European country, there is a problem with labeling, with date marking. Like in an ideal situation, like if everything was done properly, we should have all European consumers totally aware of based before and used by, clearly marked on every food product, and the difference between the two dates and the fact that in between this food can be donated and can be used in any way. But the thing is, even if there is a legislative framework, I think there was a problem of enforcement, of law application, and as a European Food Federation, we really would like to work more on it, like to increase the awareness on the date marking.
I think, Sandra, there were some campaigns in Austria for this, and you're also trying to, I think you have some sensory labs and things to raise awareness about food quality after the date that is written on.
Yeah, so the sensory lab, most of you are aware of, that is really working nicely in schools with children, but we always experience it also is a very nice workshop format also for companies. So we have a lot of partners where we go, bring the sensory lab, partly also with volunteers that assist the stations, and we bring the knowledge how to test if the food is still good or not. And I think such workshop format is always, a little bit better than just giving out notes or brochures. So doing something, experiences itself, so himself, herself. So this is really adding much value, we have the feeling. But of course, sometimes it takes too much resources.
It takes a lot of time.
But I think it's worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some addition from my side. I think that is a problem in practice. We did some research, which products have labeled used by and which products are best before. There is no line. We have some fish products with used by, the other has best before. The business operators can choose what they want, that's good, but they have not justified it. And we have best before, good after, how long after. And this time does not make confidence to the consumer. I think that is the problem. That is not a knowledge problem. That is the products which are not reliable.
We have another one. We have many. So one here in the one in the back, one in the front. And question.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
Okay. A general comment, I think we should keep apart the discussion on reducing food waste because of climate policy and nourishing the people in need without any regard to this food waste aspect. When it comes to the date labeling, if the consumer in the household knows the difference between best before or used before, and hopefully understands that a best before yogurt 2 days or 2 weeks later in the fridge is still safe, this measure does not contribute to the policy of the food banks because the yogurt is not thrown away. In the retail sector, you can see everywhere that products approaching the best before date, they are normally 1-2 days before sold at half price. So it's also not wasted, which means it's not accessible to the food donation and food waste structures. So we should keep these two things apart and think more about what new sources could we generate to enhance the quantities which are available for food banks, or what other measures, except this donation of food, are theoretically and practically available to help people in need.
Maybe Sandra, you want to add something because you're looking at new areas, or Ignazio?
I mean, I personally think that there is a connection of the date marking with the activity of food banks, because if the system would work clearly between use by and best before, you're sending a very clear message. You put on one side the quality of food and on the other side the safety. Lots of people would use, would not, would prefer the quality and would donate the food that is still eatable but not at the same quality. And that applies on households, which is not related with food banks, but also to retailers. And commerce. So that would give to the food banks a window of food that is usable, edible food.
But this would mean that the household is willing to donate a yogurt which approaches the best before date to channels which are provided by the food banks. And
that can also be regulated. I mean, it's not impossible to think that. I mean, you did the example of the yogurt, like you buy a yogurt to a shop, it's in 2 weeks that's can be used, or you don't want to eat it, you can bring it back if someone takes it. Like, I mean, it's not impossible in theory. It needs to be regulated. But without that clarity, it's impossible. No one takes back food to a supermarket during the use by best before period.
I think Ryan, do you want to talk about the example, like the retailer not wanting something where there wasn't enough time between the current date and the expiration? Like you were saying you had a donation where they couldn't deliver to the grocery store because there wasn't enough time. And so I think there are other situations, like the examples you gave, I think are very real. I think there are also other examples in addition to that where date labels are encouraging food to be wasted that could be sent to a food bank. And so Ryan has an example of that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, retailers often require a certain amount, a couple weeks or a couple years, depending on the product, to sell it. And if it doesn't fit in that window, then they often donate it. But I still think that that's maybe not the biggest issue at hand, just because supermarkets, at least in my time in Germany, the last 20 years, I've noticed that all supermarkets, not just the cheap ones or the discounters or things like that, all of them are now making it possible for consumers to purchase food at a reduced price if it's approaching the best before date, because it's become a social trend, it's become socially acceptable to save food, and it's companies, manufacturers and retailers are all making an appeal to consumers to purchase this food to do their part to save the planet. And of course that results in less donations to food banks, but we can't be against that because it's the supermarket's job to sell food and they're not contributing to food waste in that way. So yeah, they do have certain quality requirements that maybe result in food donations to food banks, but there's been a huge shift in public perception on what's still good to eat beyond the best before date. You even see on the packaging now that it says, smell me, taste me, try me, I might still be good. That was unthinkable 5, 10, 15 years ago. I just think at the end of the day, we also need to focus more on other sectors, because as we said earlier, retail is it's in their own interest to be more efficient. Yeah? So we can't put all the blame on them or even on final consumers. We have to look at other sectors where food banks aren't even involved yet. For example, agriculture. And yeah. Yeah, and your work opportunities.
Get another question here.
It's not a question, it's an additional remark. We had been also talking about the processed food, which is at the moment not available for us to donate it to people who need it. And I think one possibility to put more trust in the processed food is to have a mark, a sign, that the cooling chain has maintained right. So something which is automatically running out of color or showing another color when the food chain isn't well behaved. So this can also, if I follow I do not remember from whom the idea was, to bring back food which I do not like to a place, back to the vendor shop, which could be a possibility to make this possible.
Felicitas.
Yes, thank you very much for this input. I think it's very important to also request the current system with the labeling. We have a static labeling, so there is a company and they produce a specific type of food, and I think for the next 6 months it will be crispy like the consumer expects, and after midnight it turns into not being crispy enough. So we will provide the best before date until this 6 months and midnight. But in the meanwhile, there is additional technology available. So smart packaging, different types of indicators are available, exactly doing what you asked for. So temperature-sensitive indicators, and you could see if the cold chain was provided for the whole duration of the transport, or from the retailer to the household and back again. But of course, this is only applicable for packed food. And in addition to reducing food loss and waste, we also want to reduce packaging material. So it's you have to balance somehow the different tasks, and this adds additional challenges to the whole issue. And I think it's the same with the best before and the use by date. So in Austria or in Central Europe, a lot of, or I just arrived from Brazil, so a lot of food is not packed. So we don't have a best before and use by date on this packet because there is no packaging. So I think with the sensitive, what is the name? With your laboratory, I think it's very important to bring back or to educate the people, to enhance them to be educated and to have the skills and the abilities to see, okay, here we have a carrot. It's not looking like the model, yeah, but it's
the EU
still
model.
safe to eat. Yes. But yeah, the EU, yeah. It's always good to blame somebody else. But so I think this is one challenge we have to take with the households, to educate them and to just push them forward and also show them that such carrots are safe to be eaten. And there are different options to do so. And I think also in the whole food supply chain, the wonky products, there are some companies who provide specific brands on wonky products, so products like this one, too small, too ugly, curved. But I think it should be normal to eat this food because the quality is the same as for the straight carrots. So sometimes I'm very so not very enthusiastic about to have a second grade brand to trade such wonky products, because it should be normal to trade those products. And we should not have two classes. I know, of course, we have the law and the regulations, but the interpretation of the laws and the legal framework, this is also a big issue. Because within Germany, food sharing activities depend on the interpretation of the regional food agency. And if the regional food safety agency says food sharing is not allowed in my region, okay, this is. Yeah? So food sharing will not take place. But all the food safety agencies rely on the same law in Germany. So there should be the same interpretation. And the people in Braunschweig, they will not die because we have Verteiler, so community shelves. But perhaps people in another town are better protected by their authorities because it's not possible to implement a community shelf. And I think this is not necessary.
We've got some addition from Italy.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I would like to add something on the question of before. I think that the best before and use by is related to the food bank's activity, because we don't have to miss that also our final beneficiaries are consumer. We have many partner organizations, charitable organizations that frequently refused products that report in a best before that is fast approaching. So I just to add that.
Yeah, and then we move over here.
No, I speak. Okay. No, I would like remind my Austrian colleagues and the representative present that in Italy the legislative process began in 1997, and the GADA law dates back to 2016, 20 years later. And time and fact made it clear that it was necessary to establish an official forum at the Agricultural Ministry involving all relevant ministries, the food supply chain and the solidarity supply chain. Then, together, we wrote the law, which was approved in Parliament by both the majority and the opposition. The next step was to accept that food donations are not just charity action, but an economic choice within the country economic and social investment policies. Another point was to separate the issues related to the food supply chain from consumer issues. But because the method of addressing the problem is very different, together is complicated to operation and the law.
I mean, maybe just to, you are working on the issue or the Wiener Tafel started 26 years ago. So they're
But the first.
So don't give up.
Katharina Pfister from the Austrian Agency for Health and Food Safety. I have a small comment on date marking again. I think it's also a problem of translation sometimes. I think the German translation is not the best. So we keep trying to inform consumers about the differences between these two dates. But I think it's not always that they don't understand, which brings me to the question. We are always talking about these two sides of the problem. On the one side, we try to reduce food waste, and then on the other side, we try to reduce poverty. And when we think about solutions, we think about valuing food, and we also think about food affordability, poverty. So as of now, we have a quite hot debate in Austria about food affordability, food pricing. And I think, I would like to know if you have a perspective on these two sides of the story, giving food its value, but also making food affordable. And how do you view this kind of conflict that is here?
Trevor.
Yeah, I understand the distinction. I also don't think it's necessary to approach policy making that distinction. I don't think you can. I think there's a way to address both of those problems at the same time. I don't think you have to pick one or the other. And I guess it's true. I mean, it very may well be that date labeling is not the first issue that needs to be tackled, and I think that's totally fine. That's part of the reason we're here, is to learn what you think the biggest issues are. I don't think any of the areas that we look at in terms of law and policy are going to be the one thing that solves the problem. I do think the more of them that you can fit into like one bill, or the more holistically you can address these things, the more likely it is that everybody will be successful, that food loss and waste will go down, hunger will go down, the anti-poverty efforts will pay off, people will be healthier, they'll be happier. And I don't think it's any one policy that's going to do that. I don't think it's, one conversation about focusing specifically on food prices. I don't think it's focusing specifically on hunger alone. I think there's a number of topics that overlap. I don't think you have to choose one or the other to address at a time. I think there's a lot of very smart people in this room right now that I'm sure if we spent enough time, we could probably come up with a very coherent law that would do a lot of good. And I don't think it would be to the detriment of either one of those particular issues. And so I guess my personal thought is I would resist the push to pick one over the other and look at more holistic solutions.
I think we had Christian Grünhaus before, long time before, and then over here.
Thank you. Christian Grünhaus from WU, Vienna University of Economics and Business, Center for Non-Profit Organization and Social Impact, and we're doing some SROI calculations, not just for food bank in Austria, but also in other contexts. And I was wondering now whether you discussed the lobbying and advocating work you do, and there you improve actually the framework for the food banks, and you improve even by reduction of liability issues and so on, tax deduction and so on. You change the framework to an extent that the food banks get more food to distribute to vulnerable groups, and also on the other side with food waste. And what I was wondering, how many others are also trying to influence these kind of legal materials, the framework? It's not just the food banks, I think. And to what extent would you say it is the change in laws due to your work? Why I'm asking this is because if there is a leverage, and and you said it like in Italy, there were more donations due to the change in legislation, then I ask whether it is due to the food banks or is it due to the state? Because it's another stakeholder, and therefore this has to be included in the calculations. You understand what I mean? And my clear question is, how many others, or who are other lobbying and advocating groups are lobbying for change in laws? All them you presented here. Yeah, it's a big question now, but or can you estimate the share? What is the contribution of the work of the food banks, or on the European level on your work of? Yeah, thank you.
Well. It's a very broad concept. But let's say that, of course, on every different angle, there are a group of different actors lobbying on one side or the other. So, on our specific field, we focus especially on the social side and environmental when it comes to environmental side, so food loss and waste reduction. Of course, there is the cooperation with lots of other environmental NGOs and civil society organizations also that fight for climate change and whatsoever. While on the social side, there are lots of different aspects that are lobbied by different groups. Some of them we align, some other we differ, or we can go together. But it's always useful to try and find common path to strengthen the voice on institutional level. Then it's for example you mentioned liability, and that's also we need to understand the framework. For example, when it comes to liability, it has, criminal and civil consequences. Speaking of, legal framework, so it can't be regulated at the European level. So the European level can give a framework, but then, as there are criminal consequences if there is a misconduct it needs to be regulated nationally. So, for example, Italy is a good example of how food banks, together with other stakeholders, managed to create a legal framework that is good for the different actors. In some other countries, this work needs to be done. And what we need to do at the European level is to simplify the general framework. For example, on date labeling, this has been done, but probably has not been done properly. If after many years, the results are not satisfactory in terms of clarity for the consumers, probably we should change idea. You raise the point of the language which exists. It's a big point between different translation and different using of words. Probably, if the translation word is not satisfactory in terms of outcome, we should think of something else. Maybe a traffic light. Yellow, green, red. That is the same for everyone. So, that if it's in the orange or yellow period, you can still use it. And the red one, it's not after that, for example.
I think the only groups that I would add are, and Ryan mentioned agriculture. I think there's a lot of I don't know any farmer that's happy about leaving food in the field. And so I think they also have a lot of innovative ideas about how to make sure that the food that they're producing gets to people, and that's largely what they're growing it for. And so I think farmers, and I think even going beyond what's going on in the field, but just rural communities in general. I don't know what organizations look like in Austria, but in other countries there are groups that are focused more on rural community development and things like that, where there might be an opportunity to, they might be interested in taking until people are ready to eat the B and C grade carrots, you can process them. Maybe you can freeze them, you can turn them into soup or something else. And so there might be opportunities to do things like that. We have seen some ideas where food banks are starting to process some staple foods, and they're able to do that because they were able to get money to invest in infrastructure, and in some cases they're able to sell some of the, one example is in Mexico, they produce tortillas. They sell some of the tortillas, and then they also distribute tortillas for free. And so I think there's agriculture and just rural community development, I think, are also two other groups of organizations that I've seen in these conversations.
Just to add here, really we have to be creative to find ways that also the farmer gets some benefit. As mentioned, they might not do everything on their own and on their own cost structure, but I think here we have also good evidence from other countries and also from our country. We have some best practices already, and I think to extend that and get it to the next level, I think that would be very, very needed. And maybe still there is a room in the next also agricultural policy program, combining the ecological with the social value, knowing that it might not get more money, but to get more value out of it from both sides of the equation. That could be also something that might help us to save money, but to get both problems not solved, but continue to grow and to see how we can decrease then food waste and food insecurity.
I would like to turn the discussion a little bit more on a topic of food security. Because, I mean, when we listen to climate science, they are quite clear in what we have to expect within the next 15 to 20 years in our food system. And frankly, they have really bad news. And also, if we model the susceptibility of our value chains in our food system, again, these are really bad news. So I think we really have to take this topic far more serious. And I would expect there is definitely a need of a very broad discussion from the ministries across farmers' associations, and that topic they have to sit at the table. Via industry, retailers, that's the topic we have to reach the society. We need civil society. And within this discussion, it becomes quite clear very soon that the reduction of food losses, especially in agriculture, is probably the cheapest and easiest and most immediate action that we can take to make our systems more resilient. And on the other hand, we need organizational structures. We need, and I think here the food banks are really as a best points where we have the accumulation of knowledge. Yeah? We need trustful partners for civil society to address the people, to let's say, make most of the food we have in these crisis scenarios. And I think that's really an underestimated value of these food banks to make our food systems more resilient.
And when you talk about food security, you mean to being able to provide enough food for everybody, and not just for poor people. Mm-hmm. Are you planning any initiatives on that side?
It's actually really true. We try to bring stakeholders together, really from the governments over the farmers associations, and they really are. The topic of resilience is the topic where you get everybody. Yeah? Logically, farmers are interested to increase their resilience. They just want to know who will pay for that and what to do. But both questions have to be discussed together. So we have to bring these topics together. Okay, we need a transition in agricultural production, and we need also to include the value chain. We have to include the industry. We have to include the retailers. And at the end, we have to explain that to the broader society. When we listen currently, the discussion was already announced about food prices at the moment. These are discussion points where really sometimes wondering about what we are discussing. Because at the end, the real problems are completely somewhere else. And I think there is a common understanding that such a dialogue is really needed. Everybody knows that. But I think it has just to be started. And the sooner we start with that, the sooner we will get somehow a transition time. Otherwise, it becomes disorderly, and this is not what we want.
Excuse me. When you say we are doing this now.
Actually, we are doing that as a consulting company, as EY Denkstadt, together with science, with the University of Natural Resources, for instance, and life sciences, because we see that the different players across that value chain, they all face these problems, but yeah, nobody's actually really starting such a dialogue.
If I may, like you brought the problem part of the solution on your point, but you raised an important point that was not touched before. It's loss. So the thing is, like, what should be or what could be done better? It's using the CAP. That's, for example, in the current framework, there's still room for the strategic plans to be to find some resources for farmers in order to not to leave that food to loss. But even if it's not fit to be given to the industry or to retailers, it's probably good to eat and so usable for food donation, and it leads to food security. So in the new framework, when is not going to be divided in two pillars, but it's going to be the national level to organize the programs, this can be better, thought and regulated. The prevention of food loss and give that kind of food to food donation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Johannes, to raise this topic. I totally agree. At the moment, we are about to finalize a national project in Germany which deals with the impact or monitoring of insects and pests in Germany. And one of the results is that more and more different types of insects have an impact on the on the agricultural products, so how they look like. In most cases, how they look like. In some cases, also on the quality, so on the real nutritional quality, and if you are able to harvest at the end something. I think there will be a change there has to be a change due to the climate conditions, the changing climate conditions, which products can be produced in Central Europe. So I think we should discuss and be aware that in future perhaps we have to accept such wonky products because we will not have other products. And I think this is a necessity to start a discussion now and to be aware that we should use 90% of the harvest which is available and not only 70% because the other 30% is not nice enough, not looking not the best. So I think this is a very important topic as well, and adds additional complexity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There was one at the back and then in the front.
Hello, I'm Iveta from the Ministry of Interior from the Slovak Republic, and I'd like to ask you, you talked a lot about the cooperation between different ministries, and I'd like to ask you if you have some recommendation how to have them on the board, except some interministerial committees or platforms to overcome different interests in this topic. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have any specific examples. I think, I guess, what we've seen work in other countries is just, it's already been said, but just sitting down and figuring out what the obstacles and barriers are. And I think Australia, if you want to look to a specific country that has a good framework and has done a lot of work across ministries, Australia has done a good job with that. It's difficult without slightly more information about what the current barriers are, I think, to come up with something that might be more helpful. But I think what we've seen in some cases where there isn't necessarily a directive from Parliament or Congress or whatever the legislative body is, creating one of those, if you're currently experiencing gaps or an inability to have certain conversations, getting a law that tells you to have those conversations, to work with those agencies can be helpful. But I'd be happy to talk more about that and figure out what the actual problems and obstacles are.
If I may add something, you're going to have very soon an opportunity because you will have to transpose the Waste Framework Directive into national law. So the Austrian Parliament will be called to legislate on that. And this is a good chance to understand and treat the problem probably, in a broader way. Maybe creating, platform of interministerial activity, a group of study. So it's the Waste Framework Directive and the transposition into law. It's the good chance to move towards that direction.
Thank you. I'm looking at the time, and also looking in the audience. Do you have any last comments or questions for today?
Hi, Catherine. I'm also from the law school as a student, and I guess something I've been thinking about, listening and taking note of everyone's comments and the urge for action. Prior to pursuing my law degree, I worked with the city of Boston on, taking input from communities and turning those into actionable laws, but recognizing, as people say, we need to take action, that it looks different, not just across countries, but across communities within those countries. So depending on how you structure and at what level, who has power to control what, whether it be waste and disposals happening more in the regional or community level versus date labeling at, the entire EU level, how that's executed is going to look different country to country, and the learnings and our limited role as lawyers, because it comes from all the different stakeholders, as someone else asked about earlier. It's hard to quantify who will have the biggest role in all situations. For example, in Italy, there was, it sounds, one like major actor in the government that was able to push, versus in other areas it's a grassroots movement that works very actively with, you know, local legislators. It'll look different in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Atlanta, Georgia, or Vienna, Austria, Berlin, all the way over to Japan, South Africa, where we've worked. It's largely driven culturally as well, I think, is something that we've seen. So a lot of, you know, looking at the legal atlas guide, noting as well, like, what countries have similar legal frameworks as well as cultural frameworks. I think those teachings can be quite helpful or inform how these things can actually be executed.
No, that didn't work.
I have an additional question to what you replied. In all the studies, had there be a difference between if the country, besides all the legal and the other framework, if the country is on the mainland or if the country is an island? Because I think there will be, only from the resources side, of few differences there.
Yeah, it's certainly the case, and it does depend on how big the island is and how much food they're able to produce locally. Most of the islands that I'm familiar with outside of Australia, which is obviously a huge country in addition to being an island, are just like local food and regional food systems in the United States. And so like Hawaii, for instance, Puerto Rico, there's a couple other islands, and even the state of Alaska, which is, for those of you who don't know, up in the upper northwest part, and a lot of their food gets shipped in. And so because it's a much colder climate, they do have to, resilience in their food system looks very different than resilience in Hawaii's food system, which looks very different than Puerto Rico's food system. And so, I think, and obviously they also have very different challenges with climate impacts. And so there was a big hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, which impacted their food system pretty dramatically. Alaska, that's not necessarily the same problem that they're dealing with. And so I think kind of tying in some of the other points, like the climate change in food systems is having a big impact on islands, especially the closer they are to the equator. And I think a lot of, not just climate refugees, but a lot of the issues that the folks that don't have to leave yet are dealing with, it's going to be more and more complicated for them to develop a sustainable food system that is resilient and that they have access to food without having to rely on imports. I don't have the solution other than I think not to discount the local movement. I think, as Catherine pointed out, like a lot of innovative ideas come from the people that are in those communities, and I think to me, like I guess the greatest hope I would have is that I think the local people are able to come up with local solutions. And yeah, it very much depends on the island, but I think there's a lot of ways to increase resilience, both in food systems and relying less on imports. And in some cases, they might need outside resources to do that, but I think it is doable.
Last word.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to your question and to your comment. So I think it depends on the society on this island or on the awareness. So if we have a look at the waste generation, food waste generation, I think the islands are not different than others. If we have a look at the policy framework to reduce food waste or losses, there might be a difference. So for example, in Japan, island, a lot of people, not enough space. So they are aware of, okay, what we import, we should use it in the best way. If you have a look at to Iceland, they have at least no production in agriculture except sheep. Yeah, a lot of sheep. But they waste a lot of food, and they are not aware of it, and there are no policies in place. Mm-hmm. But they have a lot of space for landfilling of food waste, so they don't care about it. Yeah. So.
And
thank you.
Yeah, and having, I actually did a bit of research as well from when I had my degree in economics on the economies of islands as well, and especially down in the Caribbean where it's quite expensive to import food and then you're selling it for a high price, kind of speaking to the point Ignazio and Trevor made earlier where you have this cultural mindset of scarcity around food and then it gives you a higher value. So usually indigenous and local cultures are conscious of that. Many of these islands where tourism is a high part of the economy, a lot of the food waste is generated from hotels, now probably Airbnbs or like restaurants that cater to tourists. So that is like a new and interesting dynamic. I think that's also of consideration.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Ignazio, Sandra, Felicitas. Thank you to the audience for the very high-level discussion. I really want to thank you because I think what happened today is something that we need more in the future, multi-dimensional, multi-stakeholder dialogue, as you said. And somebody has to keep the sense of urgency high, and I appeal to all of you to do that together with Die Tafel Österreich and others, that we can really make something out of whatever recommendations come from you. So all our hope lies on you, Trevor. But not only that, we know already things that have to be done. So let's keep the level of urgency and sense of urgency high and actually get together and discuss things and get things done. Thank you very much for the whole energy and the time you spent with us and the discussions you had with us.
Good.